what led you to become passionate about the issue of Palestine, and how has it shaped your view on justice and global solidarity?
So, kind of when I was a kid, I really didn't know a lot about Palestine. I really didn't know a lot about the history. I really didn't know a lot about what's going on in that region. I kind of just assumed what I heard on the news that there's bombings going on there, and there has been kind of throughout the past. I assumed it was 20 years, but it turns out it's a lot longer. It's been since the inception of Israel. And the biggest thing for me is that I noticed that there's a lot of issues in the region recently that have really caught my attention closely because since 2022, I'm not going to say the date because everyone um, kind of hates when I bring that up, and it's not the point of the argument that should be made about the issue. But since 2023, it's been around 55,000 people that have been killed in the region, and it's all over Instagram. These videos, and I've seen a lot of them of people being murdered, of people being killed, of people being burned alive, of all these kind of situations that are horrific, and we don't even have any idea of what that's like in our world. So just a lot of emotion for me when I see that in the world, and the justification is not appropriate with the response because Israel's justification, and the world is seeing this and reacting obviously poorly, is that the reason that they want to invade and destroy so much of Palestine is because of the October 7th attack that occurred in 2022 by Hamas fighters, which again are not working class Palestinian people. They're a group that's inside Palestine that is a small group of people that Israel essentially uses to justify invasionary events throughout their history since the first Nakba. So I've seen that, and I am just reacting the same way that many cities in the world are reacting. And this movement that has happened recently has been based on how much escalation has happened. And now we're seeing in every city in the Western countries and in European countries that there's protests, and people are very upset, especially the Palestinian community. And also the biggest problem is that the Palestinian community is such a small community. So for them to organize and for them to try to fight for this cause is much more difficult because they're so small in population. So that's where socialist groups, left-wing groups have kind of taken a lot of that effort from them and been able to organize protests around different cities so that they can speak for the unspoken voices. So it's I really think, again, the thing is that we just don't we don't know a lot because we aren't told a lot. And I've looked into it a lot, and it's once you kind of go further than just the CNN news reports, you realize that this is a conflict that's way unjustified, and I would argue fascist in nature. That's what I'd say.
For the people that aren't updated onto the or haven't been on the news ever, that don't pay acknowledgement to the things that are happening in Palestine and Israel, could you explain it in simple terms?
Sure. Yeah. So the biggest thing that's the simple terms is that it's a conflict that has happened since the inception of Israel, because Israel was formed by taking a section of Palestine and giving it to the Zionist movement. So the Zionist movement is basically based on kind of this biblical text that said that the Jews are to be promised the area of Israel. So like, and a lot of Christians know that story, right? And I know it as well. But that's why that area was essentially taken from Palestine, because the Ottoman Empire broke up after World War I, and then Palestine was a local province of the Ottoman Empire. The Zionist movement came essentially from Europe and then settled into that region. And then also it was kind of further created because of the Holocaust. They wanted a region to be created so that Jewish people could have a country they could call their own, because Jewish people, many people argued, were so discriminated against because they didn't have a home region, because they were kind of looked at as a group that was kind of all over the world and didn't have a home base, so people could pick them out. So they created Israel for a lot of those reasons. That's some of them. And then that therefore meant that the people that lived in that region, the Palestinian people in that region, were forced out. And gradually over time, this Zionist message has caused a lot of Israelis in the region to essentially kind of develop this us versus them against the Palestinians, because they feel entitled to the land. They feel entitled to the land. So the reason that this has become such a problem is because that mindset has grown more and more. There's less cooperation between the two countries. And over time, Israel has had so much support from the West and the West is where all the money is in the world, right? So because of that, that has essentially caused the Israeli society, the country of Israel, to become so much more powerful than Palestine, because of just because of all of the financial resources that they've acquired, and they're a top 20 country in terms of GDP now at this point, right? So because of that, that's kind of created such a problem with this kind of mindset of we have the entitlement to this land, and this is what has led to these massacres that we've seen happen recently, and just the recent bombings, and every single day there's people being killed. Like if you go to Al Jazeera, their news website out of Qatar, they do a report every day on the amount of people that are killed. I recommend people look into that. Every day, it's around 30 to 50 people every single day that are killed. So that's kind of what I gave a bit of history there, and then kind of what's going on right now.
Yeah. So Palestine was all its one country along with Israel, but they gave that patch of land, and that became Israel.
So Israel actually wasn't a country.
Right.
It was Palestine originally, all throughout that region.
Yeah. And then because Jewish people were promised certain...
So specifically, like the recognition of whether or not Jewish people were promised it is up for debate. And well, not necessarily up for debate, but the question of how that was to be attained, many Jewish people argue was attained poorly. Like Gabor Mate talks a lot about Palestine, and he's Jewish himself. And he says the way that this was done, and also the fact that we feel entitled to take from somebody else, is completely nuts. And so that, so Israel was basically formed on the basis that a specific group of Jewish people called Zionists were going to come into that region and take a piece of that region. Because Zionism essentially means that there should be a nation state for these Jewish people. That's what Zionism is built on. Not all Jewish people are Zionists, but some are, essentially. Okay. Yeah.
And now Israel wants more of land.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And they're not making that necessarily the clearest thing, but the thing is that there are groups that downright have said, yes, we just want to completely annihilate Palestine and make it our own. And the problem is that there's other politicians that don't make that any less easy, because Donald Trump has said, well, we should displace a lot of the Palestinian population, and we should just move in there and basically capitalize the region so that there's a large growth of capitalism, and then Israel can just move in. So it's steadily moved more and more throughout history that they've taken more and more land from Palestine to where it's just West Bank and Gaza. And these are like small, Gaza's a city. It's just a city in size. And so the problem is that it's so small now. And then you can see as the map goes on years and years, it's just closing in more and more. So it is a taking over time that's happening.
So Israel, they feel that they're entitled to the land.
Yeah.
And so would you say they're the aggressors?
Oh, 100%. They're the aggressors in this case. They are the Russia, and Palestine's the Ukraine right now. 1,000%. And it's pretty obvious. And there's just a lot of a rhetoric that goes out of just like well, the Palestinians have this terrorist group, they're fighting this terrorist group. But if you look at the numbers that Hamas specifically, the amount of people that Hamas has killed compared to the amount of people that Israel has killed in Palestine, we're talking like 50-fold, like in terms of like Israel killing more people. So the response that Israel had to the Hamas attack on October 7th, which killed, I believe it was 1,500 Israeli people. It's 1,500 to about 2,000 people. That response that Israel has given to that situation was they've killed 50,000 Palestinian people in the past 3 years. And the justification is that that's to try to take down Hamas. But how could you have a conflict where so many civilians are killed? I mean, even if you looked at World War II, if you look at the proportion of soldiers that were killed to civilians killed, it's not nearly as close to the proportion of civilians killed to soldiers killed in this conflict. So it seems more and more obvious to me that it's a genocide, the way that people have treated this region.
And they're just kind of making it up for land, right? When really it's trying to kill the people off.
Yeah, and well, it's both of them actually. It's both of those things because I think it is that they want the land more than anything else. And I just think that what it is that they don't care how many people they have to kill to get it. It's not like downright like the same thing as Nazi Germany where they outright wanted to target Jewish people. I think that they just want that region to the land situation, but they don't care how many people they have to kill. That's where this is different than a Nazi Germany, but equally, I think, as immoral in terms of not caring about the lives lost as a result of this. And this is not all Israeli people. I want to make that clear. This is a select group of often far-right Israeli movements that have taken over Israeli society. And specifically, their leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, has moved further and further and further to far-right politics that has caused the whole the Zionist movement to kind of uprise and become more violent over time, essentially.
So within Israel, you got the Zionists, and they're kind of like the far right terrorist group.
I wouldn't call them a terrorist group. Well, I should yes, they are. Sorry, I should not say they're not because they are. But the thing is that Western media would never call them a terrorist group, right?
And then Hamas, which is they
are a terrorist group. Yeah, I'm not a spokesperson for Hamas, but I would never try to use the justification that they're a terrorist group to justify the war in Palestine. That doesn't make it okay at all. So, but I'm not a spokesperson for Hamas or for Hezbollah, which is out of Lebanon. I'm just a spokesperson for the working class of these regions who have had to suffer massively as a result of this conflict.
And how are the civilians being killed off because they're in the way, or they're purposely being targeted?
I think they're purposely being targeted. I think that there is targeting going on because some people don't want to leave the region, which, like First Nations in Canada didn't want to leave. So the response that we gave was immoral. And I'm saying that applies here too. The indigenous people of Palestine are being forced out of this region because they want land. Israel wants land for their own. They want to have the whole region to their own. And so, yes, I think they are targeting and I think some people are just, byproducts of just this warfare. But Israel's not doing the thing that they should do, which is they should have a special forces team go in there and have a very direct coordinated attack if they want to actually deal with stuff. But they just bomb the region. And they know that there's women and children in the region. And it just, that's really where I get kind of emotional because that's disgusting to me. Like that there's so many women and children that are killed as a result compared to soldiers of Hamas that are killed. It's not even like it's so obvious there's some kind of targeting going on there. And it's horrible. Like it's so horrible.
And hasn't this been going on for decades? I mean, it's only gotten like worldwide media attention since what, like 2022?
Yeah, since the attack October 7th. Yeah.
And that attack was the aggressors were Israel going into Palestine?
No, the aggressors were actually the Hamas Palestinian group going into Israel. So
Okay.
Israel responded by all these bombings, essentially. So there was an attack by a Palestinian terrorist group that killed a few hundred Israeli people, and then Israel responded to the attack by killing 50,000 people. So it was 1,000 people killed, and then Israel responded by killing 50,000 civilians. So it's a completely unproportional response, is what I'm trying to say.
And do you think this would have happened if Palestine didn't act on it first?
Well, yeah, I would have. Yes, for sure. Because the thing is I didn't know a lot about this. It would have happened at a different rate. But the thing that I just didn't know before October 7th is that Israel has been dominating that region and killing people since the first Nakba, which Nakba, I'm not sure what I think it's a Palestinian word, but it essentially means, I'm not totally, don't quote me on this, but it's like uprising, I'm pretty sure, something like that. And it essentially was the first event where Israel slaughtered people in that region. They've been doing this since their inception. Israel and Palestine have been in war since Israel's inception in 1948. So there have been conflicts going on in that region, but every single time you see every event throughout this timeline, it has always been Israel being more aggressive in every single situation. It always has been Israel killing more people than the Palestinians killed back. So in this case, October 7th, 1,000 that they killed, Israel kills 50,000 people. So the response is not proportional, and Israel's calling themselves such a sophisticated government, then they should operate sophisticatedly militarily, which they don't. They just kind of kill whoever they want. And yeah, no, I'm not saying that the people who were killed on October 7th don't deserve to be heard. Like I'm against all kinds of conflicts in that case. So that's to me, I would many people argue, oh well, you're calling Hamas a group that we should support. I'm never calling them that. And I think that was a horrible thing that happened on October 7th. But I think it is much more horrible what's happening in Palestine. Much more horrible. So
in your journey of healing and finding authenticity, how do you emotionally process witnessing injustice happening in real time, especially when it feels distant yet deeply personal?
Yeah. So I think the thing is that when I see what's going on, it's trying to think of the right words here. But the thing is that I find that there's a lot of authenticity in speaking out about what matters to me. And I think there's actually healing in looking at the injustices that are happening in the world and making a point to say, this is not okay. I think that's part of healing for me. I think that's part of healing in general, is because you realize the injustices that happen in your own life, and therefore you respond by, once you've built the strength, responding to injustices happening in the world, and you have a voice and you speak up for that voice. So it's difficult to see what's going on, and it's hard to see it, but it's important to see it. It's like when we look at World War II, it's important that we see the images of what happened in the Holocaust, because it gives us an appreciation to not do it again, right? The minute that we blur out images of Holocaust videos and we don't show kids the what we kind of think is too violent or too grotesque an image to share, we start becoming ignorant to actually what happened in history. So my dad, when I was a kid, he made it a point to show me many documentaries about the destruction that happened in Ukraine in Ukraine during when the Soviet Union collectivized the region, and how there was cannibalism going on. And I was terrified when I was 12 by watching that video. And I remember I cried and I was like, this is so horrible. But I grew up later, like really appreciating that my dad showed me that, because then it gave me an appreciation for human suffering and how bad we can get if we don't think about the things that we do, and we don't think about God when we do the things that we do. So I look at what's going on in this region in Palestine and Israel, and I just naturally want to speak out. And I think that's the biggest thing that people can do to respond to the injustice in a healing way, is to speak out, is to organize, is to protest, and to say that we've had enough of watching this suffering in the world, and we are not going to put up with people being killed for no reason that are purely bystanders of a conflict. And I think that's how you address the healing aspect of injustice in the world.
What's the leaders with an idea, right? And they have an agenda, they follow through with it, and who gets hurt? It's the people in the crosshairs. It's not them. They're just the ones laying out the orders to the soldiers, and the soldiers with the guns, they go out there and they risk their lives. For what?
Yep. That's a good point. And the problem, the thing that we're getting better at, we're definitely not good at, is that we are prosecuting the leaders responsible for these conflicts. So you have Slobodan Milosevic in Yugoslavia, who was tried by The Hague eventually for the Yugoslavian massacres that happened. But we still have a long ways to go. Like even with the Rwandan genocide, the response that we had to that situation was it took so long for us to finally respond to the leaders responsible for that and to prosecute them in international courts. There's already been an arrest warrant put out for the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, by the ICC, and for Yoav Gallant, who was the defense minister of that region. So any of the countries that are members of the ICC have a responsibility to arrest him on the spot. But the problem is there's so much pressure from the United States to not do that. And the United States is not part of the ICC. So that's where we are kind of, in so many ways, I think we are undermining our international solidarity for democracy by saying that, okay, only select groups of people can be prosecuted. Only this person can be prosecuted. But if they're a powerful person, if they're like some kind of businessman of scale, then we should take our time to look at the answers. You see their hypocrisy in it, right? It's totally crazy to me.
Yeah. What's the ICC?
An International Criminal Court. So they are a criminal body that is based on the Rome Statute, which was signed, I think, in the 40s by a whole bunch of countries, Western countries, besides the United States. They're one of the big Western countries that aren't part of it. So essentially, the ICC countries all have an agreement that if an arrest warrant is put out by the head judge of the ICC, then all those countries have to respect that rule. So if Benjamin Netanyahu comes to Canada, he will be arrested. That's essentially the rule. Justin Trudeau said he would respect that rule. We obviously don't have him as our leader anymore, so we don't know what Mark Carney's going to do. But probably he will agree. I haven't seen Mark Carney enough to know. But again, Justin Trudeau took a pretty weak position on the Israel-Palestine conflict. I haven't seen the greatest when it comes to Mark, but again, this is what the ICC is that if you're a part of it and they put out an arrest warrant, then that means that you have to respect that warrant. So hopefully if that does occur, people agree. If someone comes to Canada like Benjamin Netanyahu, he will be arrested. That's the way you address the injustice happening in that region.
Would he go to a Canadian jail? Prison?
Yeah. Well, he'd go to I'm pretty sure that he would go to a ICC, an international jail that would house. I think it's in The Hague, because the Netherlands is where all of kind of international courts are usually held. So, like prisoners during the Nazi trials of Nuremberg were all held in Nuremberg, which I don't know why I'm forgetting where Nuremberg is, but all of them were held in this international court system. And I don't know if they execute anymore, but at one time they did. But it's definitely a life imprisonment situation to where Slobodan Milosevic was tried, and then he was found guilty, and then he was put in prison.
So to recap everything, Palestine was a country in its own, then Israel separated to form their own from Palestine, right?
Yep.
And since then, they've always just been back and forth with the Jewish group.
And
right?
The
Palestinians, what religion are they?
Muslim. Yeah,
Muslim. And so it's just back and forth. They can't get into an agreement. So it's just a lot of people in the crosshairs, a lot of war going on.
Yeah,
since the 90s, right?
Since the 40s.
The 40s.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Up until today.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why don't they just find common ground, man? Like, I'm sure there's so many families out there who've been affected, right? Like, why don't they just eventually, hey, this is getting real dark. This is getting really, really is not in our best interest for both of them, right?
Yeah. Well, think about it this way. So you grow up in a country and your family lives there, and another country tells you you can't live in that country. Are you going to respond by saying, okay, I'll freely kind of move wherever? Like, because that's a long process that a person has to go through to where they have to move their whole family's heritage. Like, you have so many memories in your house, right? Barbecues with your family, like so many times you spent together, all of that then can be removed at any time by a government that does not see you fit for that region. That's where I think that it is a conflict that's two-way, but I think that it's more a conflict where Israel again is the main aggressor because of the fact that these people are home to this region. They've been home to this region for hundreds of years. They're native to this region. Israeli society is not native to that region. It's like with Canada. We have to deal with the reconciliation of taking from the native people of this land what we thought was ours, even though we're not native to that region, right? So that's where I try to give my own like justification for trying to explain it to Canadians, right? Because that's where you have to look at this conflict and be like, who's the person who deserves to have their rights respected? And I think it's the people who are native to that region who should have their rights respected ultimately, right? Because that they have families they've built there for generations. And so that's where I think that Israel could just, because Israel's such a rich nation, they could just be a little bit humble in this situation and accept that some of this land they give up to these people and they accept to coalesce together, because that's, and also they should homogenize, they should combine and collaborate with other Muslim countries, and they shouldn't become a Jewish state is what I'm trying to say, because because whenever you have a nation that and I'll say this even with Christianity, as a Christian, we've been guilty of going into a country and just saying this is a Christian nation. Now we don't respect other religions. You need to respect other religions because not everyone believes the same religion as you, and that's part of reality. And so that doesn't mean you go and you kill somebody who's of another, like, everyone knows this, right? So that's just basic human decency, and I think that we do need to move away from trying to force religion on somebody else who doesn't want a Jewish religion, right? And that's where I think we should try to collaborate with these people, because ultimately it's just a one-sided conflict in my mind.
Yeah, I'm saying just like, why do you need land so much? Can't you just be happy with your own?
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly it. Yeah. And so why not just let these people live the way they want to live and just let them coalesce? There would be less violence if they did that. And Israel has the power to do that because they're the more powerful nation here. They're the ones who have the cards to play. And so they ultimately need to I think they need to accept the cards that they're dealt, and they need to be like, okay, we need to work with these people. Like Canada has treaties signed, right? We have treaties and agreements signed with the people of this region. And so we have to have, I think they have to have treaties signed with the Palestinians that says this land is guaranteed to you. It is not infringed upon. And so that's what keeps Alberta from separating, right? Is that we have agreements with the First Nations people that keep that land sovereign First Nations territory. So they get to decide what happens to it ultimately. So that's what we have to have with the Palestinians. Israel does.
Yeah. What do you believe are the most powerful or practical ways for individuals, especially artists and creators, to support that Palestinian cause today?
So speak out. I'd say that's the biggest thing. Just get out there, get involved. And so the question is, well, what if I don't know about the conflict? That's where I did all the digging. Just learn, just educate yourself on what's going on. Because you see these protests happening in Edmonton, right? And people are like, what's this about, right? Why are people saying free Palestine? And what's this hashtag going on Instagram? Look into it, right? Like read Norman Finkelstein. He does a lot of good books about the conflict, and he talks about it from the Palestinian perspective. So a lot of books don't do that, and that's a great author to look into. You've got Gabor Mate, who talks a lot about trauma, right? But he also talks a lot about the Palestinian conflict, and he comes at it from the Palestinian perspective as well, as a Jewish person and a former Zionist. So those are two really good examples. They have a ton of knowledge. And then you've got so many podcasts. You've got Chris Hedges' podcast. You've got just look up, like any book on Noam Chomsky, another person, right? So all of those scholars and intellectuals have a massive collection on the genocide that's happened in that region, and a lot of what Western media says about what's going on there. They go into that book about how a lot of that is kind of BS, and that's not really actually what's going on, like in any way at all. And then furthermore, if you have the knowledge, go ahead and get involved in organizing meetings and speaking out on Instagram, speaking out online, and just doing what I'm doing, being in an interview with you, educating people on it, and go to protests. I haven't been to any protests, but I do plan on doing that at some point. It's just kind of like to try to find the time to do that and try to be involved. And the final thing I'll say with that is, you may have a lot of people that will try to say, that will try to tell you, okay, you shouldn't do that. It's not good for your career or something like that. Like, it's not a professional thing to do. But we live in a democracy, and ultimately, like, if we live in a democracy, you should be allowed to protest for the unspoken person, the person who's being killed, right? So history will look better on the people who spoke out on this conflict. So please speak out. Please do not be afraid to speak out. Don't watch the YEG wave videos of people being arrested by EPS. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to just get out there. Be courageous, right? And courage is the biggest thing I encourage people to have, because courage is doing something despite the feeling of being scared, or despite the feeling of being scared of what might come for you. Please try to fight for the people that are unheard. That's a big thing that can make our society more empathetic.
Yeah. Courage is not going on when you have strength. It's going on when you don't have any.
Exactly.
It's trying to do something that is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That is, not just thinking about yourself, but for other people.
Yeah.
But I've heard people say that, like, what does protesting really do?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really do much. If you really wanted to help, why don't you join the war?
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to that?
Well, I would say, I would say that there is some truth in wanting to go to that region and get involved. So that's kind of where I will just mention briefly DiEM25, is that they are a group that I'm part of that actually have people that have been to that region. And so I've talked to this guy named Bob, who's actually been to the West Bank, and he's told me about some of the stories of actually seeing how this goes on and whatnot. So that's where you do. That's where I think that's the next level, what you're talking about, because protesting, that's one thing. But again, there are some people who might become really good protest organizers, and then they might stick to just being kind of protest people. But again, you're making a point by protesting because you are putting it in front of people's face, right? You're saying that I'm going to interrupt what's going on in this little Tim Hortons parking lot to say that. And sometimes people do stuff that's illegal to try to make a point that this is completely unjust, right? Look at what happened in the 1960s, how many Black people had to protest illegally to try to fight for the movement of Black rights, right? So that's what I think some people have to do in some cases. And I think that ultimately history will look favorably on the people that do risk a lot to try to stand up for these people, even when it's protesting. A lot of people who say protesting doesn't work, that's all a lot of the kind of like hard right Alberta kind of spirit of like, like that's all that left-wing wokeness or whatever, and so we don't need any of that. And so that's purely just an ideological problem. That's got nothing to do with the people who are trying to fight for a cause, and to call them all these names and whatever. That's kind of the way that some people in Alberta think. But don't be afraid, like whether or not people say stuff. That's what I say.
Yeah. And
in that case,
with homeless rates and job loss within Canada going up, like, why should we help other countries when we still got things going on in our own country?
That's a good point. Yeah, I would say there's definitely the homeless crisis and the housing crisis are another issue. But again, that's why I'm left wing, because I'm not saying I'm just a pure Palestinian cause person. I'm on the left because that, because all those things that you just mentioned, I've thought about very closely, like the housing crisis and all of that. I mean, that's getting into a whole another can of worms with homelessness and whatnot. But like all of the domestic issues, I also do have a stance on as well. So like that's something that if people ask me as well, I would also say, well, there's issues there we need to address. So I think that all of the issues of housing, domestic issues like homelessness and housing, and then also international issues, that creates a political movement, right? Because you're not just addressing one niche issue, right? Like, and that's where I do agree with people that we should address all those issues. So that's so I agree with that for sure. I do agree with that.
Yeah, no, I really want to help other people too, but I'm under the belief too is I can't help other people unless I help myself first. I help my family,
Yeah.
and then it branches out to the next where I
Yeah.
help my local community.
Absolutely.
Then I help the city, then the country.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes, for sure. For sure.
But I don't have much experience with politics. I don't
Sure,
really. This
fair.
is, as you can tell, this is the kind of the first time I've really had like an in-depth
Yeah.
conversation with somebody
Right.
on the Palestinian-Israel war.
Yeah. Right. Right.
But you know, it is to help someone and actually be genuine about it. You can't go wrong. Whether
Yeah.
it be, you know, your family, your friends, the city, another country.
Yeah.
It's like that thought alone is like
It's very powerful.
That's something that can really help you in all facets of your life.
Yeah.
Because you actually believe in something. And
Yeah.
if it's rooted in love and compassion
Yeah.
and wanting the world to be a better place, then yeah, maybe you are doing something right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And it just, you get a feeling from it, right? Like, and that's where it hits me home. And as a Christian, right, I see what's going on there, and it makes me very like sad, right? And it is sad. And I think if you saw the same thing, you would react the same way, because this isn't the world that Jesus wanted. This is not the world that he didn't want us to be divided in this way. And I think we have to be very mindful as Christians about thinking about what the New Testament talked about, because the New Testament was a world where Jesus looked at the poor and he looked at the lowest in society, and he said that they are the most free out of anybody, than even much more so compared to the rich. So we need to look at the poor. I think in our society, we need to specifically focus on what is it that they're experiencing and what is it that they're suffering through, right? Jesus didn't give his power to he didn't give it to the Pharisees. He didn't go to them and say, oh, you guys are the chosen ones, right? He said it to the prostitute. He said it to the person that had leprosy. And those are the people in society who are the lowest. It's just a feeling that I have, and I can't help it. I just react to it, and I have to say something about it.
Yeah, it's good, man. It's definitely have done your research, and you continue to learn with every single day. And as long as it's rooted in your values, then you're gonna fight for what's right to you.
Yeah.
Right. And
yeah, man. Yeah.
If you abide to kind of the Christian teachings.
Yeah, of course.
I've heard that society or a world that would follow the commandments is like perfect, would be a utopia. But we don't do that.
No, we are sinful. We can't help that. Yeah.
But you know what?
Aim for
we can keep trying and keep doing our best.
Yeah, man. 100%.
How did you first come across Marxist thought, and what aspects of it resonate with your values around healing and authenticity?
Okay, so that's been more recently. Marxism has been kind of a huge avenue to explore, but basically the biggest thing was that as a kid, I again, like going back into my history, didn't really know a lot about that, and I've been right wing up until pretty recently. Like I've actually kind of been I was a Jordan Peterson type person for a long time, but I just started reading stuff, and I just started looking into groups, and I started watching a lot of the intellectuals talking about Marxism. So I eventually grew into it, and I kind of researched it, and I kind of looked into what Marxism is, and then I realized, like this is a legitimate. There's an analysis portion of Marxism, and then there's also the actual portion of what Marx wanted to view the world as. So the way that I see that it kind of coordinates for me in terms of healing is that Karl Marx he envisioned a world where essentially people are purely empathetic. People think in a purely empathetic sense about others. And so his idea was that first off, his analysis of capitalism is so on point and so grounded in reality. It's pretty incomparable to any other analysis I've seen. And so the way that capitalism alienates people and the way that capitalism destroys empathy in others and destroys healing in the world, he's just like Gabor in the way that he explains it. And so he just does this expert analysis on capitalism that I find for me just really like completely speaks to how it really works and how it actually causes so much suffering in the world. So this is where kind of like his analysis of actually what he thinks the alternative is kind of for me up for debate on if it's going to work or not, because the way that he envisioned the way he envisioned reality to become was, I think, maybe a little bit in some aspects utopian. So I don't know if it's functional necessarily, because he believes that the proletariat would essentially take over the government and then the state would wither away. So the whole idea of like the state withering away, I think that human greed sometimes can get in the way of that. I think that there is some people who legitimately might undermine that process. I think, though, that the aim he's talking about is like in the sense of what Jesus talks about, right? He was aiming for a world that was a more empathetic world. Did we achieve that? By no means did we. But we are aiming for a world that's closer to what the Bible talks about. Like you said with the 10 Commandments, right? It's like that's an aim we're going for. We will never achieve it, but we always strive to try to achieve it. And I think Karl Marx's analysis on wanting to eventually have the proletariat take over, which when I say proletariat, I mean the working class, take over the government, and essentially the state and the government would wither away over time in such a way that the distribution of the means of production would move all throughout all aspects of society and be shared all amongst people. That's a great world to imagine, right? Like in your head, right? Like that makes total sense. Like, okay, like we should have it that way. But again, that's where for me, I think it is a very healing idea to present that forward to the world. Kind of like what the Bible does in that way, I think.
How would that impact innovation, though? Innovation and the progress of technology? Because the people who work harder in the capitalist society get rewarded. You know, you work harder than the other guy. Of course, you're going to make more profit in your business. But then you have another guy who's just slacking off. What, he's supposed to get paid the same?
So I would argue that capitalism, I would argue that there are areas where people work harder and then they're rewarded for it. But I would argue more often than not, capitalism does not reward hard work very well at all, because that's a thing that in certain parts of the world has actually been found to not really be true at all. Because like, for example, the amount of teachers you have in the United States that work overtime and they work ridiculous hours to mark tests and to work with their students, but yet they are paid often below $50,000 a year, which is in a lot of parts of the United States barely making ends meet to try to pay for a house and for everything else. And so this idea, I think that like capitalism pays the hard worker, I think is not really true in the deeper sense, because you've got, the penance that was paid to nurses during the COVID crisis, right? And the amount of burnout that happened as a result of that. I've heard so many stories, right? And I mean, that's what happens in those situations. And we've seen pandemics happen like this, where eventually the people who work in the health industry suffer. But are they paid more for that? Are they paid what they need for that? I don't necessarily think so. But again, even with innovation, right? Like, does Elon Musk do it because he wants the money, or does he do it because he's passionate about it, right? Or did Picasso do his paintings because he wanted to be paid for them, or did he do it because he's just creative, right?
Well, we'll never know. I mean, you can clearly tell that they're good at their craft, but unless you actually live them and go in their minds, they could just be fronting, and they could just be, saying they're doing it for a cause or for the value or passion, but really they could all be for money. We never really know, but they got rich of it, like, because of capitalism.
Well, I find for me that I don't necessarily know if that is true, because for me, like, when it comes to making music, like, I'm not doing it because I want money out of it. I just love it, right? I just love the act of just creating it, right? And just like making it and just enjoying that process. I think even the same for you, like, you're doing this because you want to educate people. You're not doing it necessarily for a profit in mind. You're doing it because you want the world to become thinking long term, right? That's the whole goal.
That's true,
right?
Yeah.
So that's where I think that we
Spencer, why are you making assumptions here?
Yeah, well, I'll just go off of what I see, man.
I'm doing this to get rich, baby.
Hey, man. I mean, hey, I know that you do it because you love it, man. I know you do it because you enjoy it. It's obvious, and you always talked at the gym about, like, you wanted to do it for making people think long term and think about their health and think about their lives and stuff like that, right? So you're not doing it because you're trying to make a profit. I mean, and that whole idea.
There is that. Okay, yes, I do want.
Yeah, maybe there's an inclination. Yeah.
I want to add value to the world, and I want more eyeballs, more listens. But like, I enjoy the process.
Yeah.
But it would be a lie to say that I wouldn't want money off of it.
Yeah.
I of course I'd want to be, paid for sponsors and have YouTube ads coming along. But you know what? If that doesn't come, I'd still be happy trudging forward.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's how people usually accumulate wealth and give value to the world. And if money comes to them, it comes.
Mm-hmm.
Rarely do people get rich off of just focusing on money itself.
Yeah.
Rarely.
Yeah.
It's like a small percentage of people, but usually like great wealth comes to those people that just do what they love and keep going.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to the capitalistic society, right? Yeah, I could see how like communist society would Marxism, communism.
Yeah, I guess
they go hand in hand,
I try to be careful with the terms, because I don't see communism, like, I want to be careful about how I see communism, because there's also so many variations. Like, I think, like, more so, like, I go for kind of like a syndicalist perspective, which syndicalism is a little bit different, where syndicalism says that the workers' unions should, like you obviously know what unions are. Like, a union represents the government. Workers' unions are much more empowered in our society, essentially. And also there's other variations of socialism, like social democracy. So social democracy is like what you see in Sweden and Finland and in like those Scandinavian countries, right? Everyone knows they're very socialist minded type countries. So in those countries, you have like workers' unions that are much more prevalent, and they're like, they have rights, like actual rights. Like, you see the whole thing going on with Canada Post, and the union doesn't really have any rights in that situation. But I do really want to suggest off of the innovation point that like, I see companies like McDonald's and KFC and all these companies that produce all this fast food, and I see capitalism there. I don't see any innovation in that at all. Like, right?
No, you just see people getting taken advantage of.
Yeah.
Through high sugar, high fat, making them sick.
Yeah.
Then they go to big pharma. Like, I'm not really into conspiracies.
Yeah.
But I do believe that, a lot of the incentive with like a lot of the fast food restaurants, they're incentivized for profit. And to do this, they need to get the food higher and become more addictive.
Yeah.
High sugar, high fat, just like high carbs.
Do you think that those companies would exist in a communist society?
Probably. People would still be addicted.
But do you think that, sure. I mean, there's still addiction. There's no doubt there will be addiction. But will there be fast food chains, right? Like
fast food chains in a communist society.
Like, look at the Soviet Union, right?
Where does all the money go to? Like, where?
Well, the money would go. Well, the whole point is that the money,
it's equalized.
Well. Let me explain it in a more nuanced way, because I think like equalized is very general, right? So, for example, let's say that you have like all of the money that came from a McDonald's type situation, and all the workers associated with a very low and non skill-based job like that, right? So all the money that gets put into an industry like that is then redistributed back to plumbers and steel workers and construction workers and people that actually work real jobs that actually provide real value to the world. So that's the whole point I'm trying to make, is that we have all this excess fat in our society, which I've explained in our last interview, was this excess fat of our society, of all the industries that actually don't provide any value. A communist society, or let's just call it left wing, because I don't want to say communist, would redistribute all of those means of the industries that don't provide any value back to people who do essential work, like the super crappy jobs like plumbers and sewer workers. Because, like, I just don't think that, like, they get paid a lot, but I think that they don't get paid nearly enough for the shitty work that they do. Like, and my brother's in that group too. And so take the money that's from those industries that aren't providing really any value and give them to the industries that are providing serious value, like nurses, doctors, and people who actually are making the world building things and stuff like that, right? Because you have to give because for those horrible jobs, I think that there's got to be more incentive, right? And so the jobs that aren't providing any value, like McDonald's and all those companies, like just go away with those, because they're not actually making the world better. They're making the world less healthy, and they're all doing it in their own interests. I think honestly, one of the worst, and we can agree, products of capitalism is those type of companies. Like, no one can agree that those companies are doing one any favors.
Yeah, I mean, there's the Ronald McDonald House, which is like a really ironic.
They do a lot ironic. Ironic.
They do a lot of endeavors with charity because they do have excess money.
Yeah,
but like, who gets to decide how much money nurses make in a socialist society?
Yeah,
like, who gets to decide that? And ultimately, it's gonna be with the leaders. And do you think they'll actually have the people's best interest? I feel like, what I mean?
Well,
like,
I don't actually really call for that kind of system. I don't call for a authoritarian top-down socialist system. I call for
everyone chiming in and saying, "Oh, this is how would that work?" Like a poll.
Well, the idea of a socialist society is that the working class is the one that's in power. So, like, for example, if you have a direct, like, the style of democracy we have is a representative democracy, right? And also what you're describing is actually the system we have now, where one guy at the top, like the governments who represent a group of people, call the shots for that group of people, right? Because
it depends which industry, and depends, like, according to the business.
Well, it does. But again, that system of what you're describing is that the system is designed that person at the top will make the decisions about the whole group, right? So I'm calling for a system where it's basically more like unionized, or more or less representative and more direct, to where, let's say you have a business where they want to make a financial decision about like a thing going on, like they want to move into a new location. Instead of a boss making that decision, it's a group of people in the company that vote to make that decision. That's the argument I'm trying to make, is that the working people of that company would vote on that issue and then say, okay, we're going to go forward, and then we're going to decide if we want to invest in China, or we want to move our assets to a different country or something like that. I'm calling for a democratic workplace, a more democratic workplace. And also then that bleeds into the hospital world, the health world, the nursing world, and all of those situations, like unions of people who work in these companies that that vote on all the issues that go on within that organization. And then so people actually have a voice in terms of what happens in their workplace. It's not just a person above who just makes the calls.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. But when a person starts a business, usually they have full control of the company.
Yep.
Right? Because it's just one of them.
In a capitalist system, yeah.
But in this society that you're envisioning, once another worker comes in, even if the first person, the one who founded it, got it up to a $10,000 company, the person who he gets on board would have equal ownership of that company.
Yeah. Yeah.
How is that?
The reason I say that that's right is because think about all the labor that that person provides, because it's like the way that that's presented is not fair necessarily to the person who works in that company, because they also provide all the labor they provide in their hours to that company. And then that person who owns that company has to take a profit from that person. So technically, the value that that person provides to that business owner, some of that value has to go back to the business owner. So all the value you provide to that business doesn't go back to you. Most of it doesn't, like 80% of it doesn't. Like your wage is a very small fraction of what you make for that company every hour, right? So I'm saying that that person makes that company, and they correspondingly would get the money for the labor that they provided for that company. The labor that somebody else provides for a company.
But that's subjective though, right? It depends, how much how much does that labor mean though? Like
I don't know if it is subjective, because if you look at the actual let's say like someone works like me, for example, in a restaurant. I move dishes across this part and I spray them and then I bring them back, right? So that value that I provide in terms of, like, all I'm saying is that, like, the share, like, I'm an essential part of the company, right? If I'm not there, the whole thing kind of shuts down. If no one comes in who's a dishwasher, the whole place goes, right? The whole thing shut down. But yet, the way that the money is distributed in a company is not based on that idea. It's not based on everyone plays an essential part in this whole entire system, right? It's based on that the person who owns the company is the most essential aspect of that system, but that's not how a company works, right? A company needs a massive organization of people in order to operate. And if a key group of people are missing, the whole thing can shut down, right? And so I'm saying that the money, the economics of capitalism is not actually based on how our system works in terms of labor. So, or in terms of how a company actually works, like, because something works and then the way a person's paid is not the same in our society at all. Like, economics is not run on the same model of how things actually function. I think. Like,
okay. Well, you have to put in risk into account too, because the founder incurred all the risks to get a loan, right? They get a loan, and if it fails, they have to declare bankruptcy. Versus, a person that just hops on board, they're full time, they make minimum wage. If they leave the job, if the business tanks, they don't have to worry about anything. They just leave. There's less risk. The higher up you go, there's just the more responsibility, right? More risk in there. And
that's where I kind of wonder, is the risk in is like, there are, like, how do I explain this? Like, the person that's reinvesting in the company, or let's say that they take the risk in the first place, that risk that they took, I think essentially you have to, like for example, if they take the risk and then they pay somebody else, like they pay for the means in order to start that company, and then all of those employees are then paid by that person to then run that company, right? That still, the input of, like, for example, if you don't have any workers but you just have money, like, let's say you have 100,000 to start a company, right? This is also kind of just the fundamental flaw of economics in our system, I think, is that you have the money, but your money actually doesn't have any value if you have no workers, right? Like let's say you have all the money in the world, but there's no workers, right? Then you can't do anything because it's just you, right? So what I'm trying to say is that ultimately, like, let's go back to the time before money existed, right? You had somebody who traded with you this in order to get this, right? And all of it was based on work. Like, you had it. It's not, I think ultimately the fundamental thing that I'm trying to get at, without sounding ranty now a little bit, is that labor is the most valuable commodity. Money isn't the most valuable commodity. It's actually labor, if you think about it.
Yeah,
because
sure.
because if you see the labor somebody puts in, right, like you can't do anything without labor. Nothing will get done, right? And so money has been kind of like it's been placed as the ultimate goal, but money, I don't think is really money doesn't actually hold the weight in reality that capitalism puts on money in terms of the value it holds. Because ultimately, like what I'm trying to say is that socialism wants to also do away with money as well. Like it wants to do away with any of those means that are all capitalist means of trying to control people. Because ultimately the value is on labor. It's on the labor that is put into building glasses or in building microscopes or in working in sewers, right? Like none of that gets done if someone doesn't work the fields, right? So I'm trying to say that like the money, the whole idea of the person who put in the risk money wise, you need the workers as inputs to that money that you put in. So then that means that the workers have to be there. So then why shouldn't they have rights, right? Like why shouldn't they have their rights met?
Yeah, I'm not saying that the workers shouldn't have rights.
No,
And
I
of
know.
course,
I know.
I agree with you that yes, the entire system would not be possible without the gears that are turning.
Yes.
And that includes the cashier, that includes the waiter, that includes the accountant.
Yeah.
That includes the assistant, the person that takes the calls.
Yeah.
But in a free market, right, devoid of money, say money didn't exist. Yes, I do agree with you that people barter. They go, hey, I'll give you 2 kilograms of salt for this piece of clothing, or I'll give you, 10 kilograms of wheat for mangoes.
Yeah.
Right. And it,
but
always,
again, I want to
weighs in there.
Yeah. Sorry. I wanted to make it clear. I'm not trying to infer that we should go to back to a barter type system.
I get that.
Yeah. I'm just calling for workers' rights.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is
in that context.
And after that system, there's always just going to be somebody with more mangoes, with more silk. And there's people working on their property. And ultimately, how can you eradicate the top-down system without actually just forcing people to do it? It's I feel like it's like a mindset shift, no? Because
I think they're
think of this podcast, for instance, right? I'm starting it. This is episode 135, and I've put in like 6 hours per episode, probably more than that from like the countless research, and maybe I start getting money for it, right? I've put in thousands of hours, $0. Start going. Maybe it's exponential.
Yep.
Then I take somebody on the team who does the editing for me.
Yep.
Take somebody to do the camera work. Take somebody to, Photoshop.
But I would say, let's say that YouTube strikes one of your videos, right? And then they shut down your whole thing, right?
Yeah.
YouTube just makes that decision kind of whenever they feel like it. Like, let's say that you post an educational video on World War II or something, and they say, oh, that had graphic content. You're on strike. So YouTube at any time can take your whole entire business you made and just shut it down on the spot. They've done that with creators. That's happened like quite a few times.
Well, it's their rules. It's them. I'm on their platform. I'm playing with their game.
Yeah, and but that's where some people don't know the rules of YouTube. Like that rule, those rules aren't explicitly stated when you sign up to YouTube, right? And so, but also what I'm trying to say is that so people are we okay with our mainstream content sources censoring what gets put out and what doesn't get put out and deciding what goes on and what doesn't go on, right? Like, should we just say that certain documentaries shouldn't go out because they're offensive, or certain media shouldn't be put out because YouTube feels that it's not in there? And make no mistake, YouTube's not doing it because they think it's morally right to keep people from seeing it. It's because it might mess with their profit agenda. So what I'm saying is that we're all there's nothing wrong with wanting to have something in life, like to have some property of your own in life. But I'm saying all human beings have a moral compass, right? Like I think at least to some degree, and not everyone to the same degree, but I think like there is a feeling of right and wrong in some situations, and I think like whether or not you have that profit incentive at what you do, sure, but I argue that capitalism kind of creates a profit incentive mindset in our brains. Like what I'm trying to get you to think, Advent, is almost in the way of like all the things you just mentioned are not even necessarily maybe even you per se, because your whole entire life you have been told that these are things you have to focus on to survive, and you do have to survive in this society by focusing on profit, by focusing on all those things. But I'm saying like if things are distributed correctly in society, your mindset would shift. It would totally shift.
Well, all civilizations that have, like, to this day, it's capitalist, right? I don't think we've had
some more so than others. Yeah.
But like from time and time again, a system that isn't capitalism has failed, crumbled. And maybe and there's also an argument where, hey, this capitalism right now, we could still fail, like with the inflation rising and all these kind of the rich and the poor kind of getting more and more divided.
Exactly.
It could still be a possibility.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Throughout history, it seems like the free market capitalist system has all that has succeeded.
Well, I mean, the thing I would argue is that when we moved from slavery to feudalism to capitalism, the next logical step, like when you have capitalism and you have kind of what has occurred out of capitalism, that was a response to feudalism, right? That was a response to a time where there were slaves, and essentially the masters of a region told the slaves what to do. You had no rights. You just lived and towed the fields for your whole entire life. You were told what to do. You didn't even have money value, right? Everything was told to you what you do, and they gave you a percentage of the wheat that you made or a percentage of the meat that you produced. So that system then moved to capitalism from feudalism, because then people said, okay, we can make machines, right? We can make stuff that makes the means of production, right? So feudalism moves to capitalism because of the fact that there is a shift towards machines and factories, right, that create things. And then we move into what we have now with the Industrial Revolution, all of that I just described, right? So that means then that those things are then controlled by managers and workers, and then they will take an incentive. That's where it kind of gets weird for me, is because then now the money system comes into play, and then the money system says, okay, like the people who work in these jobs and then they work in those jobs, they don't get nearly the same amount of money. And again, you're talking about the whole thing of the rich and the poor, how it's moving slowly away. That's exactly what I'm trying to get at, right? Is that's the problem right there, is that especially when you notice how, like, because for example, 2008, right? A lot of people know there was a huge financial crisis, right? That happened because the banks in the United States took huge risks on specific types of, I think, subprime mortgages on housing in the United States that ended up actually backfiring because they were so risky. They took so much risk so quickly that a whole bunch, they used, when I say risk, they used their own customers' money to pay for these investments that they made that totally bailed out, were totally didn't even work. So a whole bunch of people lost their job because these banks made the decision to spend their own customers' money on these investments. In a socialist society, those people would have had the rights protected, that their money would not have been used for spending on kind of any risky investment that the bankers felt that they could invest. And Canada has a very regulated system that way, where we didn't suffer nearly as much in 2008 because our system is much more regulated. I don't think it's regulated quite enough, because everyone's talking about housing right now. That actually spiraled out of control starting in 2008 because Canada, the Bank of Canada decreased their getting to economics, but they decreased the whole entire interest rate of money that they sent out to banks to try to incentivize the economy during that time. And that caused all of the real estate companies to just skyrocket the housing prices in Canada. Our housing prices are like 3 times as high as any other major developed country. Canada is literally impossible to live in. I talk to everyone here, they're talking about the housing problem, right? That was all, I think, because of neoliberal tactics, because the real estate companies in Canada, and when I say neoliberal, I mean capitalism, the real estate companies in Canada starting in 2008 saw, oh, okay, so the mortgages, the interest rates are going down. Okay, we're going to increase the housing price to be competitive. And then so all of the housing real estate companies are always driving prices higher and higher to try to get people to buy, not to try to get people to buy so they can make more money, essentially. They're not trying to sell it so that people get houses, which is what the government's trying to fix. And hopefully they actually will just try to maybe look at something that might be a different system than what we have. It's just not working, is what I'm trying to say. And so that's where I think that you look at that 2008 situation was a very direct example of how capitalism totally failed.
Okay. Do you see any connections between trauma, especially intergenerational trauma, and the systemic inequalities that Marxism critiques?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question one more time?
Do you see any connection between trauma, especially intergenerational trauma, and the systematic inequalities that Marxism critiques?
Absolutely. Well, because the thing is that families are much more prone to intergenerational trauma, I think, because of the alienation that capitalism creates. So you've got so much work stress, right? And that is what kind of harbors that addictive process in the brain, right? Like you've got so many of these families who can't show up like for their kids because they're so focused on work. They're so focused on trying to make the grind and make the cut and trying to pay their bills and all this stuff. They can't even show up for their kids. They don't have time to show up for their kids. And it becomes impossible to be a parent in the modern day because you have so many of these external forces that are telling parents you need to make sure, well, not telling them, forcing them to essentially focus on having to work overtime to try to pay for their kids' school and all of this stuff. So a lot of those rights that people have are being totally infringed, and not just rights, but also just their dignity, which, you worked a job at one time and you got a good wage, right? And that's because the companies of the old era actually, and my dad talks about this all the time, companies didn't operate the same way they do now with just so much profit incentive. Companies operated because they actually wanted to serve people, right? Like companies were naturally socialist more so than they are now. They just thought that way because they thought, you know what, human beings deserve dignity and we deserve to pay people a good wage. That's just the way that the world looked at things. But again, this is just where that toxic mindset comes in and almost that addiction to money, right? Like we look at the addiction issue, like look at and the trauma created by people who force other people down. That's partially because of the addiction that a lot of these millionaires have to this money scheme that they've developed and the amount of power that they get out of it, right? So the biggest way that we address that is just, again, by becoming educated on it and just becoming aware of just how destructive that really has become and how the profit incentive has kind of destroyed people's ability to think freely and to think about maybe living a better life where their needs are addressed. Because you can be a person at the top and you probably feel really cozy, but there's a lot of people at the bottom who don't feel cozy. And that's the wide majority of people in most of these countries in the world.
Some critiques say Marxism is outdated or idealistic. What do you say to people who dismiss it without understanding its core ideas?
Yeah, so I do agree that there are some parts of it that are a little bit kind of outdated. I'm more talking about the portion of where he suggests we should go and less so the portion of the analysis of capitalism. He does like an exceptional analysis, but that's where I think Marxists miss the point, is that what he talks about I don't think is an ideology. I think it's a particular type of analysis. Because he suggests that the state should, there should be a dictatorship of the proletariat, which essentially means that the working class will take over the government. It's a weird way to describe it, dictatorship, but the working class takes over the government. And then eventually, because the working class takes over, the state will eventually wither away because the working class will have the people's interests in mind if they're in the government, if that makes sense. So it just might not. I just think that system, it seems really idealistic because human greed is just so prevalent that like there always will be probably someone who will try to undermine that withering away of the state, that attempt to try to remove state power and to try to remove hierarchical structures. There's going to be players who are going to try to like undermine that process. So I think that his idea of where the world should go isn't necessarily realistic, but I think that his analysis that he does on just the failings of capitalism are very relevant today. I would say that those are the applications where it'd be harder for someone, I think, to argue if they looked into Marxism, how that part would be outdated, I would say.
Yeah, the workers taking charge and making the decisions, right? Ultimately, you're going to have someone to want to profit more than the others, right? It's just human greed.
Yeah.
It's just how some people are just be bad apples. But how would you deal with those people? Or according to Marxism, how do you deal with that?
Well, the biggest thing is that like you look at the way that the government would implement these strategies, because the government can have the power to change that particular system. Like, for example, the government decides how regulated an economy is, right? And the more government control that there is, the more possibility there is that somebody can, the more possibility there is that workers are represented, right? That there's more distribution of power, right? And when I say distribution of power, I also mean distribution of wealth, distribution of the means of production, right? So this is where you have to pay attention to who's being elected. And the reason why I emphasize the working class in everything I say is because the working class are where the morality is in society. Like, you're always going to have people who think more morally and people who think more clearly, and they're in like the moral side of things on the working class side. On the power side, there's going to be more of a profit discussion, and all of that's kind of more profit focused discussion conversations they'll have. So that's where socialism calls on the working class to unite, because of the idea that not the idea, but just the fact that working class people are going to think about the price of bread, the price of groceries. Is my family going to be able to afford it, right? So, and also furthermore, it's just the thing that you have to realize in that kind of question of the person who's being greedy is like, there are going to be people who are greedy, and then so you have to address it by, you just have to, I think you have to just think about it. Like, this goes back to the healing portion, right? Because the healing portion of the conversation is where ultimately you realize, like, yeah, this is where you choose to be empathetic, right? You choose to be the person who says, I'm not going to be purely power and profit focused. Like Gabor Mate, this is what he talks about is very key in healing, is that profit and power in many ways, like, you have to survive, but past survival, like, now you're doing it at the cost of somebody else, right? So like, each according to their need and each according to what they bring is what the quote Marx gives, right? So that makes sense. And that's a very empathetic thing to make. And again, so like what you're saying, there's going to be greedy people, and that is part of reality, but it's how you react, right? It's all about the decisions you make. So if you decide, I'm going to fight for politics that calls for the sharing of production and the sharing amongst people, then that's going to be the force that goes against the greed in society, right? That's the idea. Like, is that you try to be more empathetic and think that way.
And you know what? I I've never been like a very materialistic person. Like as
Yeah,
long as
I
I
get
can,
that sense.
yeah, as long as I can hit the gym, talk to
Same
people,
here, man. Like,
eat good food, it doesn't even have to be good. Like it just has to like be healthy,
yeah, yeah,
Like then I'm happy,
yeah,
right? But then I noticed there are some people that I've talked to that want to be
more
just
than that.
more.
Yeah,
It's never enough.
yeah,
Don't get me wrong.
yeah,
I want a house one day. I want a nice car, right? But nothing too much.
yeah.
I'd be
That's it,
like
right?
I just want to feel connected,
Yeah,
right?
that's
And
it.
I guess housing and then starting a family is like that.
Yeah,
But like I guess society is gonna want you to move in a direction where a lot of people revel in your greatness, right?
hmm,
Because we have these idols. Hollywood is like that. A lot of academia, a lot of just even podcasting,
yeah,
right? The
yeah,
celebrities. There's all these moguls that just take over the sphere
yeah.
and make it look like it's all the goodness in life is
Is
this
all,
is all there,
yeah,
but it's not.
yeah. It
You know,
isn't.
I see a Jim Carrey, and he
Yeah,
went through his. Did you see the clips of him going through the nihilism
yeah,
phase?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And he
yeah.
had a quote of, like, "I wish everybody got everything they wanted to know that it's not
It's
what
not. Yeah,
it's all about."
yeah. It doesn't.
And I
No.
always think about that. And there's
Yeah.
even a clip of Will Smith talking about there's a rock bottom and there's a cliff top.
Hmm.
And that was like profound to me. Like, what do you mean by cliff top, Will? And he's like, where everything you've ever wanted materializes, and you're there, and it's lonely up there, and
Yeah.
it's you can't get any higher, and you're looking down, and it's sad, and every day it's just crumbling down.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at kind of the issues he's had in his family, right? And look at just how much conflict he's dealt with just being such a high performer. And so that's where, in a sense, you do actually have what I would argue is even further than what Marxist says, that you actually have alienation within the rich, that there's an alienation of what they do. And they know that, right? And there's a deep sense that there's a lot of things that when you're at the top, you realize how little people are there with you. And then there sometimes are celebrities that wake up, right? They totally wake up to that. Like there's an MMA fighter I just found recently who's now a communist. He lives in Russia. He's with the Communist Party. Was a super rich guy. But he like had a 27-5 record or something, and now he's like full blown anarcho communist. So it's that's kind of what happened to me. Was like, I obviously live in a very rich part of the world. Like I would not benefit nearly as much in the communist state compared to someone in a much lower position. But that's where I look at the thing you just described. For me, I just need a gym. Like I need a little food on the table, and honestly, like maybe just like a laptop. And like I really have been very comfortable living like that. Like and I go to work, I take the bus to work. I don't even drive. So like that to me is a very like that's a system that's pretty functional with like socialism. Like the way that socialism talks about things is just people that live really simple lives and just like, they don't need much, right? Like you don't need a lot to be happy. I found that for me. And so that's why I think in that political way, that's why my politics are the way they are.
And this MMA fighter, he just went to. Isn't Russia bad?
Yeah, well, I mean, Russia's bad in their government, right? Like he's this guy's whole story is obviously there's a whole can of worms with it, but he's not involved with Putin or anything like that. He's just living there because he was trying to find people that were kind of like the old communist group and stuff like that. But he became anarcho-communist, as he described, because he noticed that when he went to all these communist parties, it was all parties and like guys drinking expensive wine and people, like living like royalty. And that was the biggest problem with the USSR, was that the USSR actually they became that society where the people in government were actually so much more powerful than the people of the region, like the people of the Soviet Union who are the working class of that region. Like that's, I think, where you totally can fairly critique the Soviet Union. Now, whether or not you then say that communism is bad is not fair. I think it's not fair to make that call. So you do have to make that distinction, and that's where this guy does make that distinction, where he talks about anarcho communism, which is based on the writings of some people like Peter Kropotkin, and he wrote a book which I'm reading right now called The Conquest of Bread. And so that calls for anarchism is actually a left-wing idea. A lot of people think it's like far right. That's a different type of anarchism, but anarchism is basically saying, let's question the structures, right? Let's question the hierarchical structures of the world, right? Which in a sense, I'm an anarchist. Like I'm like, okay, look at how that system is, right? Like you look at the United States government, right? Like, and you look at the way it operates and the way things are done, and you could imagine how some people are anarchist, right? Like how they do see it that way, right? So that's just where that's kind of where he was. That's where he was saying he deviated from just full blown communism, because it can become authoritarian, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about DIEM 25 or
yeah.
DM?
DM. Yeah. DM. Yeah.
Yeah. So what drew you to DIEM 25, and how does its goals align with your personal mission of authenticity and meaningful change?
Yeah. So DIEM 25 was started by a guy named Yanis Varoufakis. So Yanis Varoufakis was the finance minister of Greece during their financial crisis in 2011. And essentially, Yanis Varoufakis was elected in with the Syriza party in 2011, and they were a radical left-wing party that took over during the crisis. And he was he's an economics guy. So he was ousted out of that, like kind of he voluntarily left the party because they kind of took a whole different direction that was not what they were trying to go for, which was they were trying to bring Greece out of austerity, right? And so the problem was that Greece was in a debt crisis, and the EU kept giving them loans. And then it's like you take a credit card out of the bank, and then the bank says, okay, we'll give you another credit card to pay off that credit card, right? That's the problem Greece was dealing with. So then they actually do that again, right? So 2012 comes, and then the government takes another deal. So then he resigns because he sees, okay, the government doesn't actually want to deal with the crisis. So he starts DIEM 25, and DIEM 25 basically the acronym is Democracy in Europe Movement 2025. It pushes for, by this year, a situation where they create a radical democracy in Europe. So essentially, the EU is reformed in such a way that there is a much more vote-based system amongst the people of all of these countries, so that they can vote directly on issues. So the question is like, oh, why Canada? So this is where then that system we want to translate into Canada. So we're the Canadian faction of DIEM 25, and we're not a party, but we're just like a collective at this point. And the goal that we're trying to achieve is that we will bring radical democracy into Canada. So there's more voting on actual issues going on that are in like the workplace, in government, and that it's not a representative democracy. And we want to call for a form of democracy that's closer to kind of what the early Soviet Union was before it all became a shithole. Was a system where there were people that were on councils, and essentially the councils would make decisions about what happens in each aspects. There's a police council, a hospital council, a economics council, a business council. There's a health council, right? For all aspects of society. And each member of that council is randomly picked from citizens. It's all citizens that run the council. It's not a technocracy where it's just experts. So like me and you could potentially be called on to be a part of the council. So then politics would kind of become more prevalent in people's lives. People would think more about them, more about politics. And if a person is found to not be fit for the job, they can be ousted at any time. And then another random person is selected. So then it's kind of pure. Like it's purely representative of the working class in terms of like decisions are made in the interests of not just what a Mark Carney thinks about how the world should work, or how a Justin Trudeau thinks. It's people who are working in the society will make the calls. That's kind of why I follow DIEM.
So you can just get ousted And at any time?
Yeah, anytime. Yeah, at any time.
Okay.
If people feel that you're not, if people feel you're not fit for the job, yeah, and then
Okay.
another random person is selected, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
Through, and I assume everybody has to vote. Hey, is that a must?
It's not that everyone. I'm not. We're not clear on that yet because again, we're just working on our manifesto right now. We're not like fully formed on all of those decisions, but at the meetings, my take is that we should not force everybody to vote because, like, for example, if someone's like at a meeting or something, if everyone's forced to vote on a financial decision about, like, let's say some asset that's sent to China for a company, not everyone's going to care. So, like, then people who don't care but vote, they're not going to be able to make an educated position on that issue, right? So the whole thing I would say is that people should only vote on what they care about, right? So, like, if there's an issue that comes up like Palestine, Israel, everyone should have a vote who cares about that issue, right? Who cares about what's going on there, and then it's not like you're forced to vote on stuff you don't care about, right?
How do you think radical democracy, especially in workplaces and communities, can help people feel more seen, heard, and empowered?
I think the biggest thing is that people will just feel like they will have a voice, right? So, like, when it comes to an issue made where, like, let's say the wages, right? Like, people feel like they'll have a voice in wages. They'll be able to be heard in terms of, like, okay, you know what? Like, if I am providing, like, I want to know how much I'm actually providing in labor per hour, right? And then, like, let's say a company does an audit or something and it's found a person makes 90 an hour, but they they're paid 20 an hour, right? So the person has a voice then in distribution of profits, right? And so it would create more democracy because ultimately in the West we talk about democracy, but I think we need to pay attention closely to how much we actually practice democracy, right? Like how much we actually practice the democratic process in everything that we do and in how we live our lives, right? And that's where I think radical democracy and the type of democracy I'm talking about would call on a system where we would be more democratic because we call for that in our world, but are we really that way? That's the kind of the thing I'm trying to raise, right?
Mm-hmm. So in Canada, movements like DM25 are less known. So what would it take to build momentum for a system of deeper democratic participation here?
Well, that's a good question. I think that the way that would happen is we have to look at the way that the system is now, and we have to kind of adjust accordingly. So, like, depending on the party that gets elected into power, that kind of determines what happens, right? So it all depends on, like, the party's position. Like, any party that goes into power, like, that party is on the particular mandate. And so DM25 goes into power, and let's say that happens, right? Then the idea would be that the system would be reformed, like that the people who go into power would then restructure. Like, for example, there's a lot of left-wing movements that call for the Senate to be removed because the Senate is not made up of elected people. It's made up of people who are liked by the prime minister, and then he chooses who goes into these groups. So that might be done away with, right? And so the idea is that it's more democratic. So the system would operate that everyone who's in power is voted in. They're not person that are liked by certain politicians or people that have a lot of money or people that are close with certain family there. It's all people that are voted in by the people. So all aspects would be that, right? And so the police chief is voted in by the people. Like, for example, the head of the RCMP is voted in by the Canadian population, right? Instead of how it is now.
And so this is like all in government institutions and kind of services.
Well, then it would move into services, right? So it'd move into hospitals, right? People have a voice on who's voted in as the Minister of Health, and then, for example, in a hospital, the head of that hospital is voted on who is the head, right? And kind of who decides on who that would be. And in the case of what I described earlier about the council democracy, that then would be kind of voted on who then is like ousted, right? Because it's the idea is that if you're randomly selecting people who are chosen in, people still vote on who decides who actually has power, because if they don't like who's in power, then people will vote and say, okay, I don't like what they're doing right now, and then another person will go in. So it calls on, that's what radical democracy would look like in a practical sense of kind of the image of what we're trying to go for.
Oh, dope, man. Yeah. I could definitely see like the treasurer, the secretary, the prime minister.
Yeah.
Every single person is voted in.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be more like a time constraint too, and like the efficiency. Yeah. But I could see in the long run how that would be better.
Yeah, long run. Right?
I just don't know if it'd be possible. You know what I mean?
Right.
But
I hear you.
Of course, you're still thinking of it, and you guys are still sharpening the sword. Yeah, the sword. Yeah. So.
And we're and that's in terms of what you're talking about with the whole process of time constraint. We recognize that, and that's kind of where we are hoping to also implement AI into government, into democracy as well. So AI might automate a lot of those questions of how we deal with situations that come up. Like, for example, in an emergency, right? You have emergency group. Like, one thing we were thinking is that, or at least I'm thinking, is that we have a group of the council that operates normally in, let's say, the government, who are, again, those randomly selected people who then call on some kind of emergency council groups. So COVID-19 happens, they call on an emergency council that then deals with the COVID crisis, right? And that council that operates that can tell them at any time, we're shutting you down, we're closing you down. At any time, they can close it off if they want to, right? But that council comes in as an emergencies deal that might just deal with the crisis quickly and then have that thing. Because again, what you're talking about with time constraints is the main thing that we are trying to kind of like focus on in terms of emergencies and crises, because you might not be able to vote on all those issues very quickly. So in a crisis, then you would have a emergencies group that says, okay, you're going to call on you're going to be called on and to deal with this, but then they have the power to revoke them at any point in time, right?
Yeah. Thank you, man. Thank you so much for coming on the Long Term Podcast.
Thanks. Yeah. I really appreciate it, man. Thank you for letting me speak on this and just kind of give my thoughts.
Yeah. Hopefully I wasn't, I actually asked the right questions and actually got your story out.
I honestly, I'll be totally honest with you. I probably didn't get the most amount of sleep tonight. So I was really hoping that I made coherent sense, and I totally tried to give the points I best could.
You were very thorough, man. You are very educated in the topics that you're passionate about.
Thanks.
And I think a year ago, or when we first met, like a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
How do we meet?
Yeah. Like, through Anytime Fitness. Yeah.
Oh yeah, dude. I totally 3 years ago.
Yeah.
4 years ago. I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, that's funny.
And then now we're here. Hey, and you were a totally different person 3-4 years ago.
Thanks, man. Yeah.
Now you've really sharpened the sword, and
I tried
really turned your life around, and you're going for it. And I think you're on to do amazing things.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciated it, man.
Yeah. Do you have any last words for the viewers, listeners?
Get educated. Just get out there and just learn about what you are passionate about, and be open to trying to think about others. And I just say, like, there's a lot of suffering in the world. Let's try to do what we can to try to work with people to fix it.
Yeah, stop scrolling on TikTok so much. If you do, choose the right ones.
Yeah.
Choose the right,
just the educational stuff.
Yeah. And as always, to everyone listening and watching, there is a place for you in this chaotic world. Never lose hope, strengthen your faith, and keep it long term. Spencer, Cummings, everyone. Peace.
Sweet.
Awesome.
Sweet.